I thank the gentleman for his statement. I'll now recognize the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. DeFazio, who, along with his two colleagues from Oregon, did I say Idaho? Did I say Idaho? You got it. I knew it was Oregon.
Yep.
They have bipartisan legislation on something that is unique, as a matter of fact, in forest lands, the ONC issue in Oregon. So the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. DeFazio, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to you and Chairman Bishop for this opportunity by granting the request to myself, Rep. Schrader, and Walden for a legislative hearing on the ONC Trust Conservation and Jobs Act discussion draft. This subcommittee will spend most of its time today talking about challenges facing national forest lands, lands managed by the Forest Service. But my testimony in this afternoon's panel will focus on a unique set of lands that are found only in Western Oregon. The ONC lands are not national forest lands, not managed by the Forest Service. They are managed by the BLM. They're lands that were revested to the federal government. They were previously privately held. They're governed by a unique statute, the ONC Act of 1937, which mandates these lands, again, only found in Western Oregon, will be managed for a permanent sustainable timber production for the benefit of 18 Oregon counties, substantially different than the mandate that is put upon the forest lands by our national enabling statutes. They are legally unique. They've been at the center of tremendous controversy, lengthy and ongoing litigation. One case before the Supreme Court, two more are pending right now in the D.C. Circuit Court, and they could well end up before the Supreme Court again. These lands are unique and they require a unique solution, and that's what Representative Schrader, Walden, and I have written. In short, our bipartisan solution would designate younger, previously managed timber stands for sustainable timber production to be managed by a public board under federal laws as they apply to private and state forests. The rest of the ONC lands, old growth, sensitive lands not suitable for logging, would be transferred to the Forest Service, set aside for conservation. All the lands would remain in federal ownership. But there's one point about this that I think should achieve broad support beyond Oregon among my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, which is when this legislation is fully implemented, it'll save the federal government up to $100 million a year, which is what we're paying today not to manage the ONC lands through the Department of Interior. And we would pay an additional $10 million a year for the privilege of managing these lands. The discussion draft before the subcommittee today has been publicly available for more than a year. I've been taking public comments on that. I've discussed it publicly at dozens of town halls. I've met with a very diverse array of constituency groups to hear their perspectives, learn their concerns, and discuss possible modifications. The governor of our state moved forward and established a stakeholder group of conservationists, industry, and county commissioners to study this problem, and they came up with a range of 7 options. Bottom line, we have had plenty of study. It's time to move forward with some action. The timing is very important. I have a number of counties in Western Oregon that are on the brink of insolvency. They cannot afford to provide for state-mandated critical services, law enforcement, jails, other things. I have very large rural counties with no rural law enforcement, none whatsoever. They're forming posses to try and take care of themselves. There are incredible levels of poverty in these counties, over 20% chronic unemployment. 1/5 of the people in Jackson and Josephine are eligible for and receiving food stamps. We need to provide for a sustainable solution that serves our forests, our communities, and our counties better. And that's what we've approached or attempted to do with this discussion draft. It acknowledges the reality, I think, and offers a realistic plan for helping the county solve some, not all. This is not a panacea for these counties. It will never take them back to the revenue levels they had in the past, but it will give them enough to meet some of these basic mandates. We also have major conservation victories in here to permanently protect the remaining old growth, to protect clean water, healthy fish populations, and to preserve some absolutely remarkable areas, the Rogue River area, Devil's Staircase, Chetco, in addition to the old growth. The discussion draft is not a perfect bill. There are parts I would change. There are parts that Representatives Schrader and Walden would change. Their provisions the conservation community, the timber industry, the counties, tribes, recreation community would change. That's why we're having a hearing. That's the legislative process. I look forward to discussing ways to improve and strengthen the discussion draft with the witnesses. The bottom line is doing nothing is not an option. It's time for action. It's time to stop talking about principles and concepts and start moving forward with specific legislative ideas. That's the legislative process. You put something forward, you hear concerns, you modify it, and then you move toward enacting a law. It's time to have this conversation, and I appreciate the opportunity the chairman has given to us today to begin that conversation in earnest.
I thank the gentleman for his statement. I'll recognize another gentleman from Oregon, Eastern Oregon, Mr. Walden.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank you for holding this hearing and to Mr. Grijalva as well. This is really important and timely. I'm encouraged by the committee's keen interest in identifying long-term solutions for our federal forest counties and the hardworking people who live there. I recognize my colleagues from Oregon, Peter DeFazio and Kurt Schrader, for working together with me and others as we work to deal with this problem. We all agree that the status quo serves no one well. Later today, you'll hear from Commissioner Doug Robertson, Chairman of the ONC Counties Association, and Tom Tuckman with the Governor's Office. I'm very pleased the committee called on these two individuals, given their combined wealth of knowledge on the issues before us today. It's time for real change. Let me be clear about what our forested communities face, and my colleague and friend from Southern Oregon has talked about this. Since 1990, the timber harvest from federal forest lands in Oregon has dropped by more than 90%. 60% of Oregon's forest lands are owned by the federal government, but contribute only 12% to the state's total timber harvest. The economic picture in Oregon's rural forested communities is just as bad. Of the 14 forested counties I represent, 10 currently face double-digit unemployment. 8 of these counties over the last 5 years have had an average poverty level of 14% or greater. How could we let this happen to our rural forested communities? There appears to be a direct connection between the loss of mills and jobs and the substantial increase in poverty. Harney County in 1989 had 3 operating mills and a poverty level of 10.6%. The county no longer has a single mill. Poverty level is 18.6%. 60% of the school children in the county qualify for free or reduced lunch. 60%. Harney County has seen the effects of one large catastrophic wildfire after another and a total loss of their mill infrastructure. All this while surrounding them are hundreds of thousands of acres of federal forests in desperate need of treatments that could provide a community with family wage jobs to people who really need them, and better habitat and less costs as we treat forest fires. This is ridiculous, and I'm unwilling to say that we cannot fix it. The Oregon Employment Department understood this connection of the loss of mill infrastructure and impact on the community. In 2007, after mills closed in John Day, Wallowa, and Hines, a report was issued which said job losses across these 3 communities was the equivalent to 26,000 people losing their jobs in the more metropolitan area of Oregon. What would the outcry be if suddenly the Portland area companies like Intel or Nike just simply shut down? Well, just ask people who live in John Day, Wallowa, or Hines. They'll tell you it's devastating. I think we can all agree the status quo just doesn't work and won't work going forward. Our communities don't even want the status quo. They don't want the handout that's made them dependent on the federal government. They want jobs. They want healthy forests. They're tired of the catastrophic fire and bug infestations. They're sick of the budgeting uncertainty. They want to take care of themselves. The ONC counties sent the Oregon delegation a letter to this effect on March 11th. I'd like to enter into the record with your permission, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection, it'll be part of the record.
Thank you. Other Oregon county governments are crying out for change, and I'd like to enter into the record a letter sent by the Association of Oregon Counties this week. I would also like to now enter into the record a report prepared in December of 2012 for Governor Kitzhaber, which contains some remarkable and telling facts about the current ecological and economic conditions of forest lands and communities. Across southern, central, and eastern Oregon, there are approximately 19.8 million acres of forest land. Approximately 9.2 million is available for active management. 78% of this ground is significantly at risk of crown fires. 78% is ready to go up in smokes with crown fire, a most devastating type of wildfire. Forest management activities like commercial timber harvest, stewardship contracts, watershed restoration only conducted on 1.4% of the entire 9.2 million acres. That's 129,000 acres a year, 1.4%. It's all we're treating. Given the paltry amount of activity, it's not surprising that nearly 1 in 5 people in the study area live in poverty, the highest rate in Oregon. Not only are the forests unhealthy, so are the rural forested communities, and it does not have to be this way. I highlight all of these points because this is exactly the same story which is playing out across western forests. President Theodore Roosevelt, the father of our great forest system, would be horrified at the condition of our forests and our rural communities. And I assure you he would charge forward with a fix to this problem as we're proposing. It's clear the status quo is not working, and we need to get our rural communities working again. Momentum's building for change, from county commission chambers to committee rooms of the state legislature to these very halls of Congress. We can do this. We can put people back to work in the woods. We can create prosperous communities and healthy forests. We can provide certainty for teachers and law enforcement officers, and we can better manage these forests. This is our opportunity to make federal forest policy work for Oregon and our county and our country, and I look forward to be part of the effort. And Mr. Chairman, I thank you so very much for scheduling this hearing and the incredible work you're doing on this issue.
I thank the gentleman for his comments, and I'll recognize another gentleman from Oregon, from the northwestern part, north central western part of Oregon. You know where you are from anyway. Mr. Schrader, you're recognized.
You did a great job, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for the opportunity to testify this morning on behalf of this bipartisan proposal that my colleagues and I have put forth. I'll try and keep my remarks fairly brief and ask that my full testimony be submitted for the record.
It will be part of the whole record.
The financial problems our counties are facing in Oregon are unlike anything we've seen in recent history. The likelihood of bankruptcy from my rural, timber-dependent Oregon counties is closer than ever, as we've heard, some facing possible bankruptcy within the year. Other parts of the country are recovering, and unemployment rates are dropping. The unemployment rates in many rural counties, as you've heard, including Oregon, remain in the double digits. Unemployment isn't the only problem that they're facing. Due to extreme budget cuts, counties are unable to pay for basic services their citizens rely on, like public health, education for the children, and basic public safety. One of our rural counties, as Congressman DeFazio alluded to, Josephine County, the citizens have actually resorted to arming themselves, some who have never worn a gun before, because of increased thefts and looting that's gone in the counties because they've had to cut back their public safety agencies so dramatically. In Polk County, in my district, they've also gone through another round of cuts to law enforcement officers and prosecutors. The county is currently at a minimum staffing level for county jail and sheriff patrol, no longer able to provide 24-hour service. And sheriff deputies are now being co-opted by the county judges to assist in court proceedings rather than be on patrol so that the judges can meet their needs. These examples are not unique, though, just to these two counties. Budgets are being cut, workers being laid off, schools are closing, crime's increasing. We cannot expect these communities to live with this uncertainty any longer. With a 90% decline in timber harvest on public land since 1990, our forests have become increasingly unhealthy. Without active management, forests have become overgrown, leaving them extremely susceptible not only to the catastrophic wildfire Congressman Walden alluded to, but disease like Swiss needle cast and sudden oak death, and insect infestation from bark beetles. These extreme events can and often result in diminished water quality, habitat loss, and significant harm to our environmental and ecological attributes the forest ecosystem needs to be sustainable. While most western states hold significant amount of public land, the unique Oregon and California Railroad grant land system, commonly known as O&C lands, only found in Oregon. These lands have a unique mandate, very different than a lot of BLM lands. It states that in the 1937 Act, it states that the timberland shall be managed for permanent forest production, and the timber thereon shall be sold, cut, and removed in conformity with the principle of sustained yield for the purpose of providing a permanent source of timber supply. 50% of the revenue generated off these lands goes directly to county payments, which the O&C counties had heretofore relied on for their livelihoods. The problems facing O&C lands, which are currently under BLM jurisdiction, but have been managed more like National Forest System rather than their original intention, deserve a unique solution. That's what we're asking for here. I would appreciate the opportunity to be part of this bill. Our proposal received endorsements, as you've heard, from the Oregon State Senate, the Oregon House of Representatives, and the Governor's Office. Based on a recent model, I asked Governor Kitzhaber Governor Kitzhaber's ONC committee to run, our proposal would only harvest less than half of what the lands are capable of producing, which is still a third less than the average harvest levels back in the 1990s. The bill we've proposed would protect nearly half of the lands for old growth, critical habitat for species, and aquatic protections for fish and drinking water, along with additional protection for Oregon's special places, such as the Molalla River in my home district. We think this is a great balanced approach, fair, end to the timber wars, and hopefully the resurrection of rural timber counties across this country, and particularly in our state. We thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to testify. I yield back.
Thank you very much for your testimony. And lastly, we'll